Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. Today is, what food prep day is this? This is Sunday's food prep, and I was working on the chicken. So we've still got a few trays of chicken in the fridge that need to be sorted before we pick up that quarter of a cow. So that was most of what I worked on today and then finished tomorrow. So I will bring you along for that as well. I also got my Thermomix delivered on the second day of chicken prep, so I will bring that too. So obviously I'm doing this intro a little bit late. I missed a day in there somewhere getting stuff done, and so I'm a little bit behind, and I have this video edited and then realized I didn't do an intro, which we've all, if you've been around for a while, you realize I do quite often. So this is Sunday's food prep, and then I'll bring you Monday's tomorrow, which will also have the new Thermomix in it, which was pretty neat to open up and, play something new. I don't get new very often. So I also think my honest to goodness order will be turning up today, hopefully. And then that quarter of a cow. So lots to bring you this week. So this one is the first half of all that chicken prep. So I had 4 trays of breasts and 2 trays of thighs or something left to go that needed work. So I did that, and I dehydrated some apple rings in maple and coconut too, testing out that secondary solar array with the dehydrator. So come along and see what I did, and I will see you again tomorrow. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Because we got some apples with the hamper as well as buying some. I didn't buy very many because we had all those apples that we had done previously, but I did buy a cheap box of them for the kids to eat fresh. And then we got more when we picked up the hamper. I decided to do some dehydrate some since we got that secondary solar array working. So this was a good run of testing out the dehydrator on the secondary solar array before I test out my new Thermomix on it. So what I do with apples that the kids really like is I spiralize them, and then if you just slice down one side of it, not across both, you end up with rings of apples. So it makes it really quick and easy to make those cored rings of apple. We put them in a bit of lemon and water while we're spiralizing them, as you do, and then after they have been sitting in that lemon water mix, if you dip them in a little bit of maple. Now that maple gets watered down really quickly with the lemon water, so you're not using straight maple syrup, but that little bit of maple helps the coconut stick. So if you dip it in that little bit of maple and then you dip it in the coconut and put it on the trays, then it's going to help that coconut stick to the apple. So we did that and filled all 6 trays for the dehydrator. So you want to make sure you use a bit of lemon water because you don't want the apples to brown as much, and then you don't have to do the maple and coconut. You can just do the lemon water and dehydrate them as rings, but these are always a bit of a treat. They take a while to do, so there's something that we don't do that often because you have to run the dehydrator all day for one batch, and you're only doing, I don't know, 2 apples per tray, maybe only a dozen apples per load on the dehydrator, so it's a fair bit of power and things like that. I am looking at trying to make a bit of a solar dehydrator this summer, I think. Getting some supplies together and some aluminium fly screens and maybe a couple of computer fans so that I can create airflow, put it out in the sun and dehydrate using the sun, a little bit like what people do with their cars, doing it on the dashboard of their cars, except that things like onion and stuff you wouldn't want to do on the dashboard of your car because that would smell. So I'm looking at trying to set up something I can have and move around to catch the sun as necessary. Maybe with some reflectors on it or something. I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out as this summer progresses if I have time. But that is the plan, to try and, harness the sun a little bit to make dehydrating a bit easier. Even though in summer it's easier to run the dehydrator because there's more sun on the panels, it's still a fairly heavy draw if you're wanting to do anything else. So, and maybe we'll get another battery bank at some point, and that can be purely for running something like that. But for the moment, we can run it fairly regularly with the secondary solar array, but not every day. One of the things I got while I was shopping was some sliced mushrooms. They were inexpensive at the moment because mushrooms are in season. So the only person who likes to eat them just cooked as is Darryl. The rest of the time I use them in cooking. I like them minced up in my hamburger patties. I like them in my spaghetti bolognese or in soups and stuff like that, but in small pieces. So because I decided to do apples in the dehydrator, I didn't want to do the mushrooms in the dehydrator. So I decided to can them. Now, I had a couple of jars of stock that didn't seal yesterday because of my overzealous filling of them and it being a bit fatty. So what I did was I poured that into a pot and brought that up to the boil, and then added the washed mushrooms into that. And then brought it back up to a boil. So basically what I've got is mushroom stock, which is going to be tasty as a base for plenty of things. Once that was brought back to the boil, I washed all my jars and I split the solids into jars and then added the stock. So you can see the colour of the stock is quite dark. So even the ones that don't have mushrooms in them, this stock is going to be really full of umami. It's going to be really flavourful and a great base for things like my bolognese and stuff, where I would normally add stock anyway and normally add mushrooms. So we've just sort of taken a shortcut and allowed me to have some mushrooms on the shelf. For that, I do dehydrate them regularly and then I grind them into a powder, and I just use the powder, especially in things like my sausages and stuff where you can't add that extra liquid. But this will be great for things like my bolognese and stuff. So I did the usual. I cleaned all the rims with white vinegar, put the rings on and cleaned the rings as well, as I like to do. Clean the lids, put the lids on, put the clips on, and put them all in the canner. So I had plenty here to put a whole load in the canner. These are pressure canned because mushrooms are a low acid vegetable, so they have to be pressure canned, and it's for 45 minutes. It's a fairly lengthy canning time, which is why I left a fair bit of headspace in these jars as well, because that stock is the same fatty stock too. By boiling the mushrooms, I should have gotten most of the air out of them, so we shouldn't have too much in the way of change in level once it comes in and out of the canner. Once it was done, I pulled it all out of the canner. Now you can see the little white residue that's on the outside of the jars here. That is just in relation to the water type and a bit of grease left over from the canning last night. I will wash these with hot soapy water before they go up on my shelf so that nothing can grow in that residue that's on the outside of it. Some people like to add vinegar to their water when they're canning, but the vinegar makes your rings on your ball jars or your clips on your Fowler's jars rust quicker. So I tend not to. I tend to just give my jars a really good wash afterwards. The other thing I needed to get done today was start working on the chicken that's left. So we've got the quarter of a beef coming on Wednesday, so I need the fridge space, but also the chicken date is a few days out. So I had 2 trays of thighs and 4 trays of breasts left. I sliced up and marinated all the thighs, and we'll cook them off and vacuum seal and freeze them for later in the month. Then 2 of the trays of breast I decided to turn into the chicken Kiev mince so that I can make little mini chicken Kievs, and they can go in the freezer as well. So while I've got the freezer space, I can freeze them flat and then put them into Ziploc bags after that to store them easier. So per 500 grams of mince, it was 550 grams of mince per 550 odd grams of chicken breast into my Thermomix, I added 1 egg, a quarter of a cup of nutritional yeast, and this time I added 150 grams of bacon. The last ones I made, the chicken it was lovely, but it was a little bit dry if you didn't get that inside butter with it, and part of that I think is because the recipe has parmesan in it, and we don't use parmesan for everyone else, so there was none of that extra moisture. So I think by adding the bacon in, we'll get that extra fat and moisture into the mince, which will keep that nice and moist even if some of the butter leaks out. I might also make some extra butter, and then I can cut little tabs off it and put it on top of the Kievs when I serve them if I feel like they need a little bit more moisture there as well. So I added all that to the bowl and ran through the whole 4 trays of it. So as I did each batch, I poured it all into a great big bowl and then kept on adding it all to the bowl as I needed to, and then I gave it a good blend with my hands at the end after I scraped off the lid and stuff from the Thermomix. I was going to shape these, but I ran out of time, so I decided that they can sit in the fridge overnight, and I will do this tomorrow. So I put the whole bowl in the fridge, and then we'll shape it tomorrow, so I'll get to it then. The other 2 trays of chicken I filleted. I am going to use this for a variety of things, but I thought I may as well do it all at the same time. Some of this will be for dinner, and the rest will be either vacuum sealed up and frozen to use for meals later, or cooked off and frozen, whichever way it works. I'll have to figure that out. But I filleted it all in one go because it just makes it much easier to do. So all I do is I cut the tenderloins off, cut the very knobby bit off the end, and then I use the flat of my hand on the top of the chicken breast and run the knife down the middle of it and cut it into 3 fillets if I can. Cut them smaller if need be. It doesn't really matter. We'll use them for a variety of things, so they don't need to be a consistent size. It can be any size that works, that's easy to cut, because the whole point is that I want to get through both trays in a decent amount of time. So I want to do it with a simpler method as possible. So there's about 2.5 kilos, I think, in each of these trays. So it's about 5 kilos of chicken that we're doing. And so I filleted it all and stuck it all in a bowl, and then put what I didn't use tonight went in the fridge, and I'll sort that out tomorrow when I do the kievs as well. So I made up a seasoned flour mix for dinner tonight. We're doing faux KFC tender type things. So I do a seasoned flour mix that is just plain flour, and then I add garlic powder and salt and pepper, smoked paprika, onion powder and thyme, and I mix it all through really well. You need to over season what you think it should go in there for this, because the flavor is minimal once you're cooking it all and things like that, so it needs to be a little over seasoned rather than under. So use a little more than you think you should. You can taste the flour. I know a lot of people do that, but I don't find that works very well. If I want to taste it, I'll cook the first piece up and taste it and then adjust the seasoning that way. So I breaded all the chicken. We do a flour, then egg, then flour. The eggs are just eggs whisked up. There's nothing else in them. I dip them in the flour and coat it really well, and then dip it in the egg and coat it well, and then back into the flour. And this creates a nice crunchy crumb on the outside. Always remember to use separate hands when you're doing the flour and the egg, and then that way your hands will stay clean-ish. Not real clean, but they'll be cleaner than if you were swapping over. And then that way you can get through a whole batch of it without needing to go and wash your hands. So I did the flour, egg, flour for enough for dinner for the evening, and put the rest of the chicken in the fridge. When we cook the chicken, we just shallow fry it. It works out really well. So I just use my cast iron, and I use a mix of lard and ghee in the pan. That's mostly for flavor. Don't want to use too much ghee because it will smoke, and the lard extends it, and we get the flavor in the chicken. And it doesn't take very long because of the way I filleted it. So they're fairly thin pieces of chicken. So you just put them in, shallow fry them until you can see that the top of them tends to crisp and you can see the edges of it cooking. And then once that happens, you flip it over until the other side's cooked, and then it's pretty much done. I always put it on a rack over and so that it can drip any excess fat and it stays nice and crispy. And we generally serve it with mashed potatoes, steamed veg, and a bit of gravy, a bit like a KFC type meal, because that's the sort of flavour that it has. So thank you again for joining me today, and I will catch up with you again probably tomorrow. See you later, guys.